everybody has a personal opinion, and whether or not you have to protect that opinion in this scenario, especially about other agents, to keep the best interest of your client.
Well, and I also think about if, like, what if your opinion of another agent let an offer that would have netted your client like max dollar?
All right, guys, welcome back to Realestatable, your go-to podcast for raw, real, and relevant information in the real estate world. Today, we are talking about personal opinions and why you should keep those to yourself.
I always think that, when we're looking at this whole idea of like negotiating, I need to make sure that I am not getting in the way of my client's goals, my client's wants and needs. And I think sometimes that means keeping my opinion to myself. For sure. So we're going to dive in this episode, talking about basically zipping the lip and really putting our client's interest first. All right. So diving right into it, I know that I am a super opinionated person. I am from New York. And so I might have a major New York attitude. Absolutely do. Have been told a time or 20. And so I think that, getting out of the way to make sure that I am working for my client's best through a transaction is something I work on every day. I think that it's hard because you want to make sure that great level of service is being provided across the board. And sometimes that's not the case with those that you are given, the hand that you've been given by the buyer agents that you're being presented offers with, or the listings that your buyers choose to make an offer on. Sometimes they kind of suck.
Yeah. Well, I also think too, with personal opinions, just your buyer might like something more than you do. A house might be better fit for them than you think it is, but it's their decision. I don't know how many times I've walked into a house and been like, oh gosh, they're definitely not going to pick this one.
Yeah.
And then they're like, we want to offer on that. And you're like, why? But
And then, like, you're trying to find the fine line of like, okay, what is in my client's best interest, especially in like lower price points too. And you're trying to make sure that, this castle that they're so excited about, when you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that I think that they need to be focused on. I try really hard when that's the case to focus on the resale conversation. Like, so basically I'll talk about price being super relative to condition. And basically, what have they hired me for? Just to make sure that I'm protecting their interest in the purchase. And so I also try to wait until we're in the conversation for offering, because so many times in the very beginning of my career, I'm like, oh my gosh, this absolute worst thing ever. And they're like, my favorite thing is the same thing that I thought was the absolute worst thing ever, which is just a cosmetic item. So many different ways to look at that for sure.
Yeah. And I think too, once you get to know, I feel like this speaks a lot to buyers, with your opinion. But once you start touring homes with people, you kind of get a feel for what they're looking for. So maybe instead of voicing your personal opinion, saying, hey, when we were touring the house on Main Street, you said that the bedrooms didn't have enough storage. These kind of look very similar to that house. Do you think that this is a better option? And kind of using like what they say, not really to move them a certain way, but because you are focusing on trying to make them happy, trying to have them make the best decision. But just using what they say and taking note of what they're actually looking for can help you kind of voice a positive opinion.
Well, and all of that can start with a great buyer consultation, a bit at like a home finding meeting at the beginning, which 90% of what comes out of that is going to be completely different. What they're going to choose more times than not is not going to be, what they're thinking that they're looking for. But it's a really great way to not have your opinions coming out, but having like, okay, this is what you were asking me to basically, this is what you hired me to find. And then here's all the reasons that this is not. In a constructive way. I think that is absolute, whether it's through the home finding process, whether it's through the negotiating process, making sure that you're finding the right timing for that conversation to be happening, and making sure that you're keeping your personal opinions. If they've told you this is what they're looking for, your personal opinion out of the mix.
Yeah, I also think too, one thing that some of my buyers do, not everybody is able to do this if they're relocating, but I love working with a buyer who is willing to drive by a potential home before you see it. Because sometimes, you might know that neighborhood or you might know it's on a busy road and that they are really truly looking for a neighborhood with sidewalks. It's so great to say, hey, why don't you just drive by that property and see if it's still something that you might be interested in? But don't really give them a reason. Um, why you could say, hey, I know this is on a double yellow line road and you're looking for a neighborhood, but I always try to have people drive by and just make sure that that's a good fit for them.
Yeah. Lots of different ways to look at that too. So when you are looking at taking this like into the negotiating concept, and so I recently had a buyer and we're in like the rock bottom price point. They qualify for very little. They're using some down payment assistance. They are a one income family, all of like the first time home buyer kind of case scenario. And so everything seems like a great option. And the property that they ended up choosing, which was there wasn't very many choices, and there's a timeline that we have to be sticking with, but the property they decided to offer on, let's put it that way, um there was a lot of really questionable things because of the condition, because like them, first time home buyer was living there with very little money outside of her paycheck to paycheck to care for this home. And so when it came down to it and we were looking at the negotiations, etc., I basically was painting the picture of like not taking the sins of the current seller and basically taking those on for you as the buyer, as the first time home buyer. And I tried to take the concept of what they thought was like, okay, this is the best thing ever, because they were just so excited to buy a home, even though there were so many red flags. What could I do to help negotiate a deal to help protect them? So the special stipulations were stacked with the amount of things that needed to be: new carpet, making sure the HVAC was good, having the septic tank pumped, termite inspection, all of these things that I could add to help protect them, to keep my opinion to myself, but then also make sure that I'm doing the job for the buyer. And so long story short, we then had a 112-page home inspection on top of
Oh
that,
gosh.
which they were willing to concede to like 110 pages they were willing to do, which I, advised against. But I, back and forth. And I had a seller agent on the other side. Basically, this is what she said to me: if they wanted to buy new construction, that's what they should have done. No, if you had a seller that was ready and willing and prepared to sell in a market, they probably should have done the bare minimum. We would have probably said a 50-page home inspection report and this price point was good. This was absolute not like the seller not caring for this property. So keeping opinions, to yourself during that time when you have a buyer that is so, emotionally charged in that decision, and looking back, because here's the long story short, they're not purchasing that house. We're now in a little less desirable location as far as like further distance to work, but in a much better care for home. So many good things. And now looking and talking with that buyer, they have thanked me a couple of times to basically make sure that I'm protecting their interest in this, but also keeping them in check, like their emotions in check during that process. Do you have any similar scenarios that you're like, okay, opinions to myself, but I still need to be looking out for buyer's best interest?
Yeah, I mean, for me, not so much under contract, but I've been helping a family trying to find a home here, military relocating. That's like my specialty, I feel like. And so I'm doing video tours, and you can't always convey everything in a video tour, but this house was like one street over from Fort Campbell Boulevard, which is a busy road.
Mm-hmm.
And the house was great. Like, they renovated it great. It wasn't, like, a sloppy job or anything, but it was on such a sloped driveway. And sometimes in video that's hard. If it's not super sloped, I'll park my car and say, "You can see how my car is sloped. This is what the driveway looks like." But I didn't even pull my car in because I was like, "I'm gonna bottom out if I pull out."
In your SUV.
Well, I was worried about it. So I'm like, "I'm
Yeah.
not even gonna chance it."
Yeah.
And so I told her that, and they were still really considering. And I just said, that's up to you guys. If you have a car or whatever, I said, I'm happy to bring my husband's truck and pull into the driveway, because I was like, I'm not doing that to my car. But I was like, I could pull the truck up, and you could see the angle. They ultimately didn't choose it, but I think that just by me saying, I wasn't comfortable pulling in the driveway because it was pretty sloped. And it just goes to show, and that builds that trust, that honesty. Um, it is a personal opinion, I guess. I didn't really conceal, but it was an opinion that was based in my client's best interest.
Yeah. Well, and I think that too, like we're in a market where we do a lot of sight unseen contracts,
Hmm.
like what Ashley was just talking about. And so doing the video and the property tours and giving an opinion is a lot of what a buyer is going to be basing their decisions off of. And then, after the transaction, once they close and they're finally here and all of those things, you want to make sure that you're protecting their interest and trying to marry someone you've never met before,
Hmm.
trying to figure out how can I best find and meet a need for them. And so I struggle with when I'm doing video tours, I want to be as descriptive as possible.
Oh,
It
yeah.
like, all five senses are covered in the videos. I have massive opinions, like you're going to hear everything. And then I started to look back at the concept of this and I'm like, I'm not even letting them see the house. So I'm
Oh
like,
my gosh.
trash, trash, everything. And it could be new construction. And I'm
Mm.
like, and here's every defect because I wanted to make sure that they had every single thing that they would be sensing if they were here. But like, let's max that to the 3000th degree. And that was what the video tour was. So I've changed the kind of like the mentality going in and the concept of how I do video tours where they get a tour of the house. So you're going to just see, you're going to get a map out layout. Here's everything. And it's kind of a silent walking tour. And then we go back to the front door, and then you get my opinion. Then you get the
Mm.
five senses, and then you get but they have the ability to really feel the house. And it's not the video going up and down, left and right, going, here's a paint defect, here's this, the carpet smells, this light needs to be switched out. Look at the popcorn ceilings. Here's all of the things that are not measuring up to your other options. So I think when you're doing video tours, keeping your opinion to yourself, that's a little tough.
Now I'm like wondering, because your video tours are way shorter than mine, but I am that person who
Mhm.
does. So I'll show like the room and everything. And then while I'm in that room, I'm going to say, oh, hey, it looks like they had pets. The door trim is chewed up a little bit. Like, so I'm in the room still so they know where I'm at. Cause I feel like if you do it like that, doesn't it double your time or no?
Mm, I don't know because I feel like the first one is literally just spacing it out. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like our property tours that we do for like our listings. So I have maybe like a 3 minute walkthrough,
Mm.
and then I don't know, not really. I haven't noticed a big
Oh.
difference, honestly. I don't know. I'm about to time myself both ways.
She's going to be running through the house.
And go. I don't think it
Yeah.
really doubles the time on that. But I also think about like if you're there personally with someone that is looking in person, like you are way shorter amount of time in these properties than if
Oh,
you're doing the virtual tour. So
yeah.
it's definitely way shorter than that. I don't know. It's so hard because it's like you're gonna miss something. Like it's just if a buyer's there versus what
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at the 57th house for the day for 62 different directions, you're going to miss something. And so I'm just trying to cover bases as best as I can.
Yeah, I do too. And I always just worry and think about like, okay, if I was in my buyer's position, what would I want pointed out? What are
Yeah.
the major things? I'm not going to point out like a chip in the paint or something that's super easy to fix. But I do like to just make note, like, oh, hey, this trim needs to be replaced. No big deal. Or this spindle outside, the dog chewed it. It's
Yeah.
damaged.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I just pass that on to the home inspector. Hey, I'm not sure what's going on with this over here. It's making a funny noise, but that should be something that the home inspector will find, kind
Hmm.
of thing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I think that when you're looking at the whole concept of like keeping your opinion to yourself, and really making sure that you are still servicing your buyers, what about on the listing side of things? Because I know our prep and prepare process with
Hmm.
sellers is intense. I
Yeah.
mean, I honestly, it's intense. And I know like any of us that have sold our own personal houses while being realtors are like, man, this sucks. We don't realize how bad this sucks for that.
Yeah.
But keeping your personal opinion to yourself, or just being tactful when you're going through and you're asking someone to basically completely depersonalize and all but move out of the house, to prep their house to be able to be list ready. I think that that is a difficult choosing of the right words and keeping opinions, which I mean, I'm not going through and trashing someone's personal house that I'm about to list and market, But I also think that when you go into grandma's house and there's, 65 porcelain dolls that are staring back at you, or
Mhm.
67 tchotchkes in the dining room, or the wall that has every single photo from when their 35-year-old was born, covering from floor to ceiling. Like all of that stuff is what makes that house a home for them. And
Mhm.
so talking through and making sure that you're being tactful in that prep and prepare conversation is another part of the puzzle that you're like, okay, I got to balance what I really want to say and being mindful of what the seller's opinion is.
I just put that on I put that on the buyers. So I'm like,
Mhm.
"Hey, you know what? Oh, I love this family picture. Gosh, you have so many great pictures. We really need to make sure that we're appealing to everyone." Right? So you're saying, "Okay, I love your decor, even if it's awful, but I love it so much, but I don't know that everyone's going to love it. I don't know that a potential buyer for this property is going to love your family photos as much as you do." I know I don't even remember, maybe like 2 years ago, I went on a listing appointment in my neighborhood. So I was super pumped. And she had just, I don't even know how many, but there was like a million crosses on her wall. And I'm like, I love Jesus too, but if you're selling, you need to pare down your items. And I
Mhm.
didn't say like somebody who doesn't believe in God is going to buy your house, but I'm like, it's a chance. They might not like the crosses. And so trying to just tell people to take down and pare down to be as minimal as possible. I always just try to tell people, when your house feels empty, when it's starting to feel bare, that's when you're about 90%,
Mhm.
So,
Well, and I also think you can use the concept of new houses sell best.
mhm,
And that's because it's completely depersonalized. So anything, besides furniture and hard surfaces, if you can get to that place, it's just literally there's no feelings in that. So it's basically, the logistics of a hard surface
yeah,
concept of what you're selling. So using that as an example too, I also go back to those sellers as buyers. And so talk about, what was appealing to you. If you walked in and you saw, something that was specific to those sellers, it kind of feels like you're in someone else's home that you really shouldn't even be there for, because you weren't necessarily invited,
mhm,
to share dinner, and but you're there, so should I buy it, and could this be my home? And so I kind of had that awkward conversation with them of like taking that concept and going, okay, we need to get to close to empty hard surfaces and furniture only.
yeah.
um and as close as we can get to that, like Ashley said, once you think you're there, you're probably 90% there. But that's a lot of prep and preparing. And I know that um, th- going through the process with sellers too, assuming that they're not going to get to 100% without a couple of revisits to that property, a little bit of the encouragement and move along. And a lot of times you have sellers that'll say, this doesn't even feel like home. This doesn't feel like my house anymore. And it's like, that's
That's the
perfect,
point.
because now we're going to be appealing. But it kind of is like where you're taking all of what they've done to make this a home, and you're taking and pulling back those layers. So being conscious of that, keeping your personal opinions, to yourself, and just being super motivated on the facts, and all of that, returning results for them can be super helpful in that too.
It's funny because I was talking to Mark about putting pictures on our walls, because I think we have 3 pictures that are like current-ish, took taken last year, and then the rest are probably like 5 or 6 years old, and there's 6 of them. That says how many pictures I have hanging up. So I'm kind of like, should I hang picture? Am I allowed to personalize my own house? I don't even know.
With no hopes of
I'm
even
not
moving.
moving. Yeah.
Like literally staying put forever. Like, yeah, it's kind of like I also feel like that too in decor and stuff. I'm like, okay, this needs to be kind of like standard
Yeah.
standard
Appeal to
decor.
everyone.
Appeal to everybody, even though you're like, but I don't even have people in my house. So
Yeah.
it's totally fine. It's totally fine.
Tiffany, question for you. How do you handle the situation when, um, your listing is active and you may have received 1 or 2 offers, and your seller says, well, have you worked with this agent in the past? Do you have a good working relationship with them?
So I think that it's hard, right? Because code of ethics, you are
Mhm.
bound by code of ethics if you are a realtor. And so what you can say versus personal opinion and experience, etc., you got to make sure that you're super focused on the facts. And so luckily we're in a marketplace where we have tons of realtors. So the likelihood that we are having repeat transactions with agents is super, super slim. So I try to keep the facts and stuff to the minimum. Have I worked with the other agent? Yes or no? Have I actually had any experience with them? And a lot of times I will, working with a team, if Ashlee has worked with someone, if it's beneficial, I'm going to talk about Ashlee's experience um, in different circumstances, right? So I'm going to be like, oh, I know working with this builder and this agent, this is how this should go because I live through the
Yeah.
transaction, with being on a team. And so, but when I'm talking with a seller and they're saying, what it what is your experience with this agent? I try really hard to just to make sure that I'm sticking to the facts as far as that goes. And if it has been a complete dumpster fire of transactions before, I also feel like I'm set up in a different direction because I know what the possibility of scenarios coming at me. So I know that this agent might be trying to negotiate at this level. Or maybe at this angle, or I kind of already know the game plan of how I could be successful. Cause the reality is right now, whether or not you've had a good or a bad transaction with an agent previously, whether or not the negotiation has been an uphill battle, the conversation, the opinions not being kept to themselves, etc. Um, right now, in your client's best interest, it is every single time the right choice to negotiate and do 150% for your client if that's the house that they choose,
Yep.
if that's the buyer that presents. So it does not matter really, truly. And I understand where a seller or a buyer would ask for that opinion and all of that. But if that is the right choice for them, there's nothing that you can't overcome for that 30 to 60-day transaction. So using your opinion of that other person to pull into that transaction really could prevent your client's best interest from actually being, you know, figured out. So I think that that's the biggest thing when that happens. And I kind of think that was like a non-answer to the question. Um, I just think it's to the minimum. Yes or no. And I think if you didn't have the best transaction history with them, you can just talk about how it doesn't matter because you're working at, the 10th degree and your interests are going to be protected through
Yep.
that contract. And we're going to get you to closing, making sure your best interest is always at the forefront. And we're going to negotiate and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So yes, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yes, you really cannot be where you have 20 offers on the table and you're going, well, I like Susie the best out of this and I can't stand working with George, et cetera. Now, the flip side of that, absolutely have a very, very real conversation about lenders. Because if I've had a storm of a transaction with a lender right now in this
Mm.
market, I think you have the ability to kind of leverage negotiation to say, we need to kind of pivot and this buyer needs to seek a second opinion. This buyer needs to be seeking, or you need to have conversations with the lender to kind of set up expectations. So I think agents always overcome mortgage lenders, and you can kind of pivot that conversation to talk about your experience with a lender as well. So there's my non-answer.
Yeah. I feel like every ethics question answer is it depends. Like, you're like,
It
I don't even
depends.
want to touch it. It's fine.
Well, it's funny because like even like I think of like those like top 3 worst agents ever to work with are like burned in your memory, right? And I think about that and I'm like, okay, if a transaction or an offer comes in from that buyer's agent again right now, what would I do? Heck yes, I would sell that dang listing to that
Yeah.
like dead to me forever. Okay, great. We're in sales. That's not possible. And so I think that as much as I want to say I will never, ever, ever again. Mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think
unfortunately.
it's just the working relationship is with other agents is all about presenting it to your client. So you have an offer. It doesn't matter if me and Tiffany had a dumpster fire transaction, a couple of months ago. is this in the best interest of your client? Like you were saying, it's about the facts and it's about protecting your client. It's not about us as agents. We'll work with whoever, if you're new or you're old or you don't use the internet, we're still going to work with you um, because we're working for our client. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's something when you're thinking about personal opinions, everybody has a personal opinion. And whether or not you have to protect that opinion in this scenario, especially about other agents. And to keep the best interest of your client.
Well, and I also think about if like, what if your opinion of another agent um let an offer that would have netted your client like max dollar.
Yeah.
And so your opinion of, oh yeah, he's terrible, worst ever, 10 out of 10, don't recommend. All right. So they're like, okay, that opinion, moving on. And what if the only other offers that you could present yield them a 10% difference? But for darn sure you closed a deal with Mr. Terrible, and there was absolute ability for you to just work harder and dig your heels in and make it happen for your client. I think that you got to be looking at it that way. And so keeping your opinion to yourself, because I think our clients lean into us and they're looking and they're going, okay, Tiff, what should I be doing? Like, what is your opinion on this? Oh, no,
Mhm.
no, I don't want a roller coaster. Well, guess what? Anytime that I've worked with an agent that has been absolutely insane on the other side, my client knows minimal. Like
Yes.
that transaction, there's little bumps up and down, like little potholes that we're going over. Those transactions could be literally the highest and the lowest drops of a roller coaster from hell.
Mhm.
And you should not ever, in any circumstance, allow your client to feel a little bit more than the rise and fall of that. Now, I agree, there's not every single thing that can be, withheld or smoothed over without your client, having some point of direction in that. But it should not be, you wouldn't believe what he had to say about this. And she said this, and then she's going to do, can you believe that they would do this? No, absolutely. You take the temperature of the emotion out of that. And what are the facts of what needs to be negotiated? You have to be that temperature check before you're actually bringing your client into that. And that is just our job. Like,
Mhm.
unfortunately, you signed up to be a psychologist. That is just what's going to happen. And you think it's just your clients, but it's not.
Yeah.
And I think that right now, margins are so thin and professionals are feeling it more than they ever have. And they're acting stupid. I
Yeah.
mean, I have to self check myself sometimes. I'm acting stupid sometimes. And I'm going, okay, wait. Client's best interest. Yeah, we want to bury them with our words. Client's best interest. We've got to make sure that we're keeping that in check. Client's best interest.
Yeah. I mean, I just had a transaction not too long ago, that had I mean, we found the house and we weren't closing for a while. I mean, it was longer than 45 days. So we had plenty of time for clear to close, the seller to move out, all the things. And kind of when I got to final walkthrough, it was not okay. Like I was like, "Oh my gosh." And my guy was relocating from another country. So like I was literally the eyes and ears. And so did he know every detail of what was happening? No, but I did fill him in on the details that were pertinent to him to know. But I'm not going to describe what happened with the other agent, it and I think that that's just part of making a smooth transaction. The things that you can not so much conceal, but you can handle behind the scenes. I think that I mean, if you think about it, you're in surgery. So you have no idea what's happening to you. Something could go wrong, but they fix it and then you wake up and they're like, "Oh, well, this did happen, but everything's fine now." You
Mm-hmm.
know? And you trust that person. And so I think that just kind of letting your clients know what's important, don't fill them in on all the drama because then that creates more drama for you from them and then you have drama from both sides.
Well, not only that too, I always like, because you have to make sure you're riding a fine line in
Mhm.
broker advisement of making sure that your client is in tuned with the right details and without the emotions every single time. That's the answer every time.
Mhm.
But when you look at this, if I have to bring something to a client, if I'm on the top of the roller coaster and I'm about to plunge down the million-foot drop, I want to be able to know, how am I getting back up to the next peak before I go to that client. So in most circumstances, you should be able to have a resolution to whatever you're bringing them in order to be able to help kind of protect that, like, hey, I just dropped you to the pit of the floor. 1 second, I should have an answer for you tomorrow. We'll figure this all
Yeah.
out, all the things. So the example that Ashlee just brought up, a lot of what needed to be done was some back end work to be like, no, this is not acceptable. These are the 3 ways that you're going to be able to make the resolution to get to the point of where you should have already been. And then from there, once we got to that place, it was like, why did we do the work ahead of time to be able to tell the seller, okay, it's exactly where it needs to be. The transaction is exactly where it needs to be. We were just 3 steps ahead of it, figuring out it wasn't in those 3 steps that were coming.
Hmm.
So I think that it's such a fine line, and we want to make sure that we're keeping code of ethics. I mean, I take that oath for being a realtor is something that we don't take lightly. You should not be taking lightly either. Making sure that your client is well informed through a transaction, something you shouldn't be taking lightly either. But I also think that the emotions of that's the whole point of this episode, is to talk about taking the emotions out of it, because if anything, society is so much more emotionally charged than they have ever been. The last 3 years has just been like, what the heck is going on with people?
Yeah.
Humankind is not kind.
We are not okay.
Not, and even self-checking yourself through this, but like, really, there's been times where I'm like, okay, to the other agent, are we trying to get this closed? Or are we trying to fight? Like,
Yeah.
what is happening? Like, breathing through this. I had someone say to me, recently, there was a question about keys and possession. And he told me, what was the word that he described me as? I don't know, but man, I was seeing red. It was basically like, you're being too difficult. I'm like, I'm being difficult when I'm following the transaction about when possession happens, and I'm not just willy-nilly giving a key whenever. He used a word though, and I guess Jesus erased it from my mind. But he used a word, I started to see red. But you know what though? Going back to the transaction and going back to that contract and going, possession happens when X, Y, and Z. There's no stipulations that change that. And don't you know, by me going back to the facts, the black and white on that, it was 3 days that if I would have just not been difficult and just gave him the key like he was asking, 3 days that we had to work out this possession thing by contract. In 3 days that buyer would have had possession of a property that they did not own. I'm like, that's not difficult. That's following the
Yeah.
transaction. But I had to say to him, when he used whatever word to describe how I was not giving him the answer that he wanted, I said, we need to just pause right now. I said, because it's already in our contract and nothing has been amended. And so really, it's not about what you and I think and what our opinion is about what should be done right now. It's about the contract and what both of our clients agree on. So if the seller and the buyer agree to something different, it needs to be reflected in the contract. And then we have a mute point. And it doesn't matter what you and I think and how difficult I'm being or how X, Y, and Z you're being right now. It's about our clients and what that contract reads. And I think that just in general, there's a frustration level because we are in an uphill battle every day, trying
Mhm.
to make transactions happen and come together, and, finding the clients and just the grind of real estate every single day. And I think that that's exhausting, and it's turning not the best of people, in this world. And so how can you make sure you're managing yourself, managing, the clients that you're charged responsibility for, and managing everything else that kind of comes in the mix with that?
Well, and I think that's the beauty of having contracts, right? Because you can keep your personal opinion to yourself because you don't have one in a contract. It's black and white. It says what it says, and everybody has to agree. And I think that that's what protects your clients. That's what protects you. And that's what gives you the ability to say, you can call me whatever you want, but the contract says you don't get keys until this day. So unless we can both agree to change it, this is where it stands. And I think that that's with me. I do have a black and white personality, and so I do like that. I'm like, this is what it says. Sorry about it. Sorry about your life. You should have wrote it in. You should have changed this. And I think I mean, I love that.
Well, and we work with our broker, our managing broker is so in tune with that. Like,
Yeah.
where it's just like, what's your contract say? What's your contract say? Like, I don't care about all the rest of the stuff. What's your contract
Man,
say?
sometimes I ask her a question about something and she finds something else wrong somewhere else, and I'm like, "No, please stay on topic. Don't look at page 7, we're on page 9."
we're,
Like
we're on page 9 and I only need this one fire
yeah.
answered and all the things that as far as that
Yeah.
goes. But I
I
think
do love her though.
it's so true though, because I think that there's so many other pieces to the puzzle and there's so many other things that are moving, and you never know what the other side is going through, what the transaction with the other client, with the agent, all of those things. You can only control what you can control on your side, and sometimes that's not even controllable. And so the thing that is absolute a standard is that accepted contract. It already says what everyone agrees upon. So taking your opinion out of that and then making sure that you're not going, okay, this is what should be happening if your client's interest has not been spoken. So when you're going back and forth with the agent, I have to constantly say, well, I have to check with my client. Like,
Mhm.
sure, you could have the keys. Like, I don't care about the key situation, all the thing. Like, that's not my property. You know, I, but it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter whether or not I think it needs to be held, whatever. You have to go, okay, is your client requesting something different than what's already in the contract? If they are, I need that in writing so I can present, so I can get my client's answer.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what your answer is.
Yep.
You can advise your client, but you need to be communicating your client's interests through all of that. So many great pieces to the puzzle as far as that goes. I think that really humans are struggling right now. I know that we're just in a different place. Like, I feel like negotiations look completely different.
Yep.
Um, so many logistics of people making moves, like it's just a struggle. And I think that keeping our opinions to ourselves and making sure that you are being the emotional manager of everything through a transaction is really super key to being, that forever agent, the agent for life for people.
All right, guys, lots of good tips to keeping your lips sealed and keeping your personal opinion to yourself when it comes to transactions, agents, houses. I always think it's best. I work with a lot of first time home buyers. And so getting a feel for what they're looking for, I don't walk into a house and express anything other than kind of what they're expressing. So I kind of feed off of what they're thinking. I'm not going to walk into a house and say, "Wow, this is crap." I'm going to let them say, "Oh, wow, this is really nice. Oh, yes, it's great. I love it too." So just kind of feeding off their energy when giving personal opinions.
Yeah, and I think working with other agents, I think that, it's always best to keep emotions and opinions out of the negotiations. Really, when it comes to the other parties that are involved, the only emotions that you need to be, checking are your clients, your represented
Mhm.
clients. Outside of that, there's really no need or no room for emotions in any other direction. The opinions, keeping those to yourself, because that charges those emotions to be brought into the forefront. And really, we have to remember that we are there for our clients' best interests. Their needs should always be at the forefront of the decisions that we're making, and the way that we're communicating.
I also think a good reference and resource, you can always check on the National Association of Realtors page. If you're unsure of ethics and maybe what you should do, they have a whole page dedicated to the code of ethics and kind of just what kind of standard you're being held to.
And when in doubt, your broker should be always the person that is kind of like your lighthouse guiding light for you through a transaction. I always will, make the phone call to our broker and be like, "Hey, I need a self check. I need to be simmering down before I turn around and have, the conversation about X, Y, and Z." And so make sure that you're utilizing your broker is really the manager of all of that, wrapped up into one little piece too. So NAR is super great and knowledgeable as far as code of ethics. You should be completely in tune with that, but then also your broker. Make sure that you are checking yourself at the door with your broker through transactions.
All right, guys, if you found this episode helpful, make sure you download it, give it a 5-star review. You can find us everywhere on social, and we will see you next time on Realestatable.